Please be seated. In my mid-20s, I was living and working in England on my own. I was about to approach my first Thanksgiving there and mention the day to a British friend. She said, "What do you Americans eat on Thanksgiving?" I described my perfect meal: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, and fried rice, and how I would put the stuffing, the fried rice, and the cranberry sauce all next to each other. As I was describing this meal, for the first time, an unsettling question popped into my mind. Is fried rice a standard American Thanksgiving food? Now, the thought of millions of Americans missing out on fried rice for Thanksgiving was so sad and unimaginable previously that I ignored it for several days. I called up eventually one of my American friends and asked her if it was. She said no, and the unimaginable was true. Joking aside, I felt my world tilt a little bit. I had 20-some years of living with one narrative, not even thinking to think about another way. Yes, this was just food. However, it caused me to ponder, what else did I take for granted as the way it was? What else hadn't I even considered examining? In today's gospel, Jesus pulls a child into his circle of teaching. I've always wondered where he found this child. Now, the little child may have been beloved by his parents. Culturally, though, children were considered a dependent liability. They weren't even considered fully human until they reached adulthood and could contribute. Their societal position was at the bottom. Jesus says to his squabbling followers, "This is who you welcome, this child, if you welcome God." Or to welcome the holy into your life, you need to welcome those who have the lowest position, those without power, those you've never considered to welcome. Jesus is flipping what the disciples know of the world upside down again and again. He's saying, how you have always known the world to be is no longer true with me. Last week, we heard the first of 3 of Jesus' announcements of his betrayal and death. Today, we heard his second. We didn't read what comes in between the two, both the transfiguration, where a few disciples see Elijah and Moses on a mountain all shiny, and Jesus' last exorcism. By this point in the sacred story, Jesus' followers have walked with Jesus. They have witnessed Jesus' many ministry and miracles. They have heard countless teachings and predictions of the future. They are still hoping that life will return to a way they can understand just better, and that Jesus will fit into that box. Today's argument of who was the greatest is just one example. Yet Jesus keeps saying that life with God is beyond what you can imagine and giving some concrete examples. Why don't the disciples get it? It is true that the Gospel of Mark is particularly hard on Jesus' followers. Reading this part this time, however, I am noticing COVID-inspired empathy. After a 1.5 years of continuous change, instability, anxious headlines, devastation, losses, and grief that are both personal, communal, and global, at times I feel like I can't take any more information in. It is tempting to daydream like Jesus' followers about things going back to the way I can picture and understand, and sticking God into that very limited dream. We all are at times weary, tired, anxious. We all have seen the brokenness of the world in old and new ways. A faithful response is to mourn and lament, and to notice how we need a God of love more than ever. And at this time, we are asked to listen to Jesus' words. We are asked to seek a world that Jesus describes. We are asked to dissolve boundaries that limit the humanity of all people. We are asked to imagine what was previously unimaginable. My continual prayer has been, how, God? How? And I can confidently say that I don't have all the answers. I wonder and wrestle with the question and not knowing. And I suspect sometimes that dwelling in that vulnerability of not knowing is where God calls me and God calls us. What I do know is that whatever we do as followers of Jesus, we do it faithfully with others. We look for glimmers of hope and love that point to God in our world now, and we pray. Now, we are all gathered here in person and virtually today. We are walking our faith with others. I wonder what it would look like to share one of your glimmers of hope or love that you've experienced with one another, either after the service today or throughout your week. A story that I heard this week that gave me hope and showed me God's love was of Arlington Presbyterian Church. They are a faith community that spent years listening to their neighbors. They heard their neighbors' joys and struggles, including the growing inability to find affordable housing. Over that course of listening, the faith community decided to partner with a local affordable housing agency. They tore down their building that had no longer been serving them to build 173 units of housing. They continue to worship in that new building in their neighborhood, within their faith community. I am sure that this is something the church founders never imagined over 100 years ago. And it is as faithful a response as it was to build the first building, to build this building. Another place I have been surprised to experience a sense of holy is in my neighborhood Buy Nothing group. In this group, you offer things for free that you no longer need and ask for what you do. I joined to reduce my family's environmental impact. Although a non-religious organization, what surprised me is how I feel God between some of the connections with neighbors that I previously didn't know. How we have shared stories of hope and loss as we share our things. And how we've had to practice the generosity of giving and the vulnerability of asking for what we need. Now, none of my stories are enough on their own. However, when woven together with the stories that I know we have in our faith community, where we all have experienced God, boundaries begin to break. God is able to move more freely in our lives, and we are able to understand more fully what it means and looks like to follow Jesus. Love is spread. Hope is shared. God is there. God is here always.